Well, welcome everyone to tonight's workshop. Just a reminder, with a bit of luck, it's being recorded. I must say we've had a few problems in recent times with our conversion of the data, which is done externally to council, and that's caused some delays in getting the recordings up on our website. I don't know, Ginny, can you give us an update on that at all?
The latest one is we do have all the visual, the latest council meeting, but the audio has dropped in and out. And unfortunately, the technical person that deals with that is on leave at the moment, and that was the key delay that we had.
So we'll endeavour to get these up as quickly as we can, but there is some problems with the conversion, so we'll try to improve that in the future. Just want to say we have an apology from Councillor Priest, who's on leave. This is here.
I don't think it's an apology, as I said.
It's taken leave, sorry. Are there any comments on the notes from the workshop on the 12th last month? All okay with those? Tonight we have a bit of a change to our agenda. The item 1, Narrow Streets, is going to be deferred until our next workshop. That's because our presenter has had to go and do some personal business, so he's away somewhere else. Item number 2 is the Heritage Grant Scheme, and Chris Newberg here help us work through that item. So, finally,
sorry, I just butt in. In the minutes of the last one, in the milk depot, did we, and it might be the case we didn't have to, or not have to, but the suggestion that came up from the minister down there about this 18-month business and that, should that be in the minutes? Remember, instead of just doing the 1-1, what we were saying, that we looked at 2, but 18 months.
I think it was formally passed at council.
Yes, that's right.
Council minutes.
But wasn't it here where we discussed it?
We did discuss it at workshop, and I think those were suggested, there's no doubt.
It was resolved at council to give a redevelopment clause, which will give them a minimum of 18 months.
So I'll make the adjustments to these comments to include those words, but the resolution of council takes precedent.
Actually, did you speak about that at the council meeting or at the...
When I'm doing this, I'm deaf, so what was it all about? I didn't hear a thing.
We've got to repeat all that.
I'm not like, women can listen and do things at the same time. I can't. Once I read or something, I'm gone. So what did we say? I missed it entirely.
Right.
This is the minutes.
Look up YouTube.
Generalisation.
This is the minutes from the last workshop. Minutes of the last meeting, and?
You're talking about Milk Depot, about the 18 months.
Yes.
You're talking about that at workshop or at council?
At council, that the first 18 months, they don't have a what's it called, a reconstruction clause.
Yes.
That kicks in at 18 months.
That's fine, but that was at council?
That was a council, yes.
I just thought we discussed it then too, and I just saw the minutes that
No, because it wasn't at workshop, because I didn't come up with the thoughts after the workshop, and I contacted Greg. That way to go along with what you thought too, to get a longer contract, but with still giving council and or a new owner the ability to...
that was the council, I suppose.
That council, yeah.
Right, okay.
So in that case, we'll leave the workshop notes.
I said nothing.
Okay. Go now over to Chris. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, mate. Sorry. I'm going to somewhat unusually declare a conflict with this because I own one of the only six state heritage places, and I just consider the whole grouping of heritage places as pretty small. And there's a grant scheme. I might be a participant, so I'll come and get me when you're done.
All you've got to do is say you won't make a claim on the scheme and you're fine.
Which is why I'm leaving the room.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Well, really, as outlined in the workshop notes, the Heritage Grant Program is a way of giving something back to the community, which is something that the community tends to hold in fairly high regard from other councils. I think our community and our strategic plan seeks to emphasise and celebrate the history of Prospect. So this program is a way of providing some financial incentive or some kind of refund for people who are doing work on their properties to enhance or restore the heritage value. So the purpose of the discussion tonight is to get some initial feedback from elected members on how far we think the scheme could stretch, could be included, what should be excluded, should it be limited to just building works, or should we look at expanding to include research and projects that actually contribute to documenting the history of the area. So looking at the broader heritage mix rather than simply the built form heritage. So I'll lead off the discussion really with some options and get, I guess, some indication of where we should be targeting this heritage grants program. So a little bit of research was undertaken that looked at other areas. So this is predominantly based around the Burnside model with a little bit of tweaking and tinkering influenced by Norwood, Payne and St Peters. In those areas, the value of the fund has varied over the years. It's been as high as $25,000 and as low as $10,000. They've put in place
in total.
Yeah,
that's the total fund for the year.
Total.
That's pretty good, isn't it?
It's responsive to the amount of demand. So we looked into how many applications for development have we received in the historic conservation zone or that respects local heritage places over the years. In total, we received about 500 DAs a year over the entire city. Local heritage places and historic conservation zones, maybe 8 to 10 a year.
Is that based on the current historic?
Yes, it is.
We should use our imagination if that increases.
So if council in the future increase the extent of its historic conservation zones or the number of local heritage places, which is something that's anticipated by our strategic plan, at that stage, council could look at revisiting the amount in the scheme and either reducing it or increasing it or fiddling around the edges with some of the criteria. So I'll just do a quick run through. So in terms of, I appreciate that most of you won't be able to read that because I probably can't from here. But in terms of buildings, so the built form, we could look at something that's available to owners of local heritage places, of which there's 88, state heritage places, which there's 6, contributory items in the historic conservation zones. So they're those buildings that have been considered to contribute to the fabric of the area, but aren't listed individually as local heritage places. There's 178. We could look at all properties in historic conservation zones. So even those contributory items, there would be other items within those zones that do contribute to the character. And we're going to even expand it to owners of character homes that don't actually have any heritage protection. That would sort of broaden the scope quite an extent. So are there any thoughts initially in terms of that extent? Should we narrow it? Should we widen it? Any thoughts?
I should think there'd be quite a lot of character houses that would now be 100th century old. So built, 1911, 13, 14. So I'm just thinking that might be an area that could be included.
How much? Did we put some aside in the budget?
We put $10,000 aside.
Well, then I think we limit it severely to local heritage or state heritage.
I'd agree with Monica. I think you've got to start really narrow to $10,000.
That's fair, because I was just looking at the Victorian, what they only do it for repair or conservation, which is what I think you should limit it to, because you don't want to be paying for people's property values. You know what I'm saying? But $10,000 is bugger all. Absolutely bugger all.
Agree.
Any other comments or other buildings?
I mean, I'm very much of a mind. If you're going to have one, 10,000 is insufficient. Why would you bother? And yeah, I know, but I wasn't in favour of that either. And generally, I'm not in favour. And I've owned a lot of heritage buildings. In fact, most of the buildings I've ever owned in Adelaide, which is quite a number, have all bar one been heritage, and I've never thought about making a claim. I mean, I generally think, because mostly those buildings are significant, and if you've got the money to buy them, fix them yourself. Don't expect the public to pay. So I'm generally not in favour. And I know, I only recently discussed with somebody who asked me if there was, in fact, it was the owner of my old house. And he said, yeah, he wanted to speak to the council, but nobody seems to know anything about it. Now, he can afford without, but if the opportunity was there, he said he'd use it. Can't blame him. But
I guess as part of this discussion, we've got to look at what sort of limit do we put on the contribution. It's not $10,000 all going to a single property. Whether we have a cap. I think in terms of distributing the information in relation to this, the narrower the scope, the more targeted we can be in our communication. So if it is just local and state heritage places, then you can see we do a mail out to 94 properties. So if we had a cap of $1,000 or $2,000, then there's 5 to 10 properties, so 5 to 10% of our heritage listed properties have the opportunity to roll that over time, and in 10 years, everyone's access to the fund. So if we narrow it down too much, we might run out of properties. We can always revisit that in the future.
Is there a time frame on, so they can only apply once, or in 5 years' time?
That's
or
part of the discussion. We wouldn't want to see a monopoly on it. So there needs to be a hierarchy in terms of the assessment. I mean, if you've just got grant funding the previous year, then perhaps you'll move lower down. It wouldn't necessarily exclude you from it. That would just need to be factored into the assessment process.
And similarly to how we assess the community grant, so there'd be some assessment matrix that would give more points for this and more points for that, and that sort of stuff.
I'm really uncomfortable with giving grants to individual properties. I think if we were going to do it, it would be, there has to be some sort of community benefit other than an individual benefit to somebody's personal property. And I guess that defeats the purpose of having it. But I don't think I liked it in the first place. And I really am uncomfortable giving grants to personal properties when everybody else misses out.
I appreciate that, but we've got a budget of $10,000. We've got to spend it. Council's endorsed that program, so we've just got to get to a point where we're comfortable with the general scope of that program, release it, see how it goes, review it next budget.
what was the determination on what the fund was? Is it heritage or how it had to be sent? Was it community? Could we look at heritage buildings that need? It
was framed around heritage buildings with an opportunity to expand it to include heritage-related programs and activities. So, say a local researcher wanted to publish a book, a walking tour, a pamphlet, there was scope within the scheme put forward at the budget time to actually include that. That's what this discussion is about. How much we limit it, and if we limit it to a degree that we're not actually giving out that funding, if we're restricting it to be solely about built heritage, then how does that really celebrate and reinforce our heritage?
The heritage architect, how did we fund her?
Through the grants program. It needs to be through the grants program.
The one that's just done the heritage review?
Oh no, that's through the Hollis not through a grant program.
But no, how did we fund it? We funded it just out of operating budget, or was it a grant, or what? How did we fund her?
In terms of the heritage review,
Yeah, the Heritage Review, yes.
general operating, council budgeted to undertake a heritage review.
Right.
So that was independent of this. This would be more along the lines of if a local community group was of a mind to publish something, this would be a trigger rather than going through a community grant program. Have something that specifically targets heritage. But what I'm hearing is that owners of character homes, potentially we could leave that off the list for the moment, but keep it in the back pocket for expansion in the future. Seeing 2 nods, which is all I need.
You've got to limit it to quite a degree, I would have thought.
Yeah. If we strip it back to the top 3 in terms of local heritage places, state heritage places and contributory items, that gives us a pool of about 250 properties to target and see what the response is like. If it's not overwhelming, because this sort of relies on these people wanting to do some restorative works within the next 9 months, then we could look at expanding the scope. We call for a second.
Type of work.
Sorry, Alan.
Sorry, I didn't see that.
And then you go. I've had a hands up.
It's just a question, and I really lost it when you got to the 178. But while I was looking at the top 2, you come along and Sandwood, again, I took heaps of kids for walking, the other day, and I talked about about the area, but particularly about Nailsworth Village, and there's only about 4 places left. And I personally am not sure of any of the old Nailsworth villages on this list. So with 10 grand not being big money, maybe a first sort of step would be anything but one house at number 1 California Street. We should perhaps be using that money to put a plaque on that place, that this place is such and such. And that. So maybe getting recognition of all these places over a time to get there first. Not quite sure what I'm saying with it, but I came down the road here and you said about heritage items, so that comes a bit further down. But we got the only last tramline post, and people can run into that and their dogs can run around and do whatever they want for them. And 9 out of 10 people you speak to wouldn't know what it was. Well, they know it's a post because they hit it and it's made out of steel. But take that away, they don't know it's got a history, or something like that. So to do the buildings, and I think Monica said a bit about doing up people, but say the 6 heritage places all had bull-nose verandas, a whole lot of them, and that's part of their thing, and let's fix it up. Well, you'd fix up the first 2 and you'd do nowhere else. So maybe having that recognition of things should be those initial things of the amount of money we've got. A plaque, 10,000, most probably do. 10,000, 20,000.
I think there's merit in that as an idea, but it sort of falls outside the scope of what a heritage grants program is. We're providing it to interested community members or individuals who actually approach council rather than us going out. I think Unley did something recently where they put in identifier posts and you've got a QR code so you can scan it and get the detail and the information. I think that's a discrete project for council that sits outside the intent of the Heritage Grants program.
Sorry, can I just say that one last thing? Sorry, Tiger. It's like, and the only place I really know it is if you go to North Adelaide and you're trying to get a park for the Piccadilly Cinema, and you're walking down the side street on the various houses, they've got a round little rosy thing that says this house is,
enamel.
yeah,
And we've got a couple of parts talking about that we stumble across randomly.
Well, we
They're
haven't
not
got,
very,
we haven't got one down here on the walls.
For those parts, do you know where most of them are? Mario Russo never handed them out, and Greg found them in the cupboard about a year ago. About 60 of them that were supposed to go around Prospect, they found in the cupboard.
So if anyone comes to us, we can give them.
Just now. Look, I'm just aware that for all intents and purposes, $10,000, year one of the program, we're really kind of talking pilot, trial, experimental. My view is that I'd rather limit it just to the local and state heritage places. I think if we open it up to 200 odds, 300, almost 300 properties, we are creating an expectation we're not going to fulfil. Conversely, and I know what you were saying, Chris, if we have too few, we might not actually spend the money. I suspect with 94 properties, we're going to spend the money pretty quickly with $10,000. So my view would be for the first year, we're only talking 9 months, look at the 94 properties, I think we'll spend the money, and then the new council can deliberate how much is in the fund and then how far it extends. I think we should extend it beyond this year, but I think let's narrow the focus a little bit.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of the parks. I think that's another budget bid maybe next year. Not a bad idea. Or just, yeah.
Already got them, yeah.
Budget bid to dust them off, yeah, that's right.
But they are wood, so they fall apart.
But yeah, the ceramic ones is what they
The
like.
quicker the better. Could I just add the Prospect Local, sorry,
Christine, you can go.
Prospect Local History Group story done an investigation on having heritage awards, but it's just we're overloaded and we've just had to put it on the back burner. And and we think that those blue and white enamel ones, they're quite expensive, but they're far better than those sort of horrible pieces of wood. I'd be ashamed to put them up, quite frankly, if I was going to one of these places.
But if we're going to look at any types of works related to buildings, we're looking at restoration, conservation, enhancement and reinstatement, but not additions and alterations, new dwellings, routine maintenance such as painting, electrical, plumbing work, internal work, fencing, unless it's reinstating the original type of fence and installation of security devices. Is that reasonable in terms of a broad guide to inform our assessment? Because I mentioned there's 8 to 10 development applications. Not all these sorts of work actually required.
Can you just define what a security device is?
An alarm. Signal alarming, stick some shutters in.
I can't see how that would. Not really supportive of that. I'm not sure that's sort of. I'm very supportive of that, Chris. Sorry, I was doing it nationally. I was looking at my iPad at the same time.
Enhancement leaves a huge window, doesn't it? Enhancement.
Yeah, it could be.
Build a second story.
Because we'll know the additions and alterations are excluded. I mean, one of the things is routine maintenance such as painting is excluded, but enhancement could be restoring the original paint finish or stonework.
But isn't that restoration? Enhancement leaves open a real big window. Restoration, to me, is what this heritage is about. But they're the key words, aren't they? Restoration, conservation, reinstatement. Yeah, I guess reinstatement I'd go with.
We can just narrow that a little bit. That makes it easier.
What about access to the heritage expert? What her actual title is? What if that was so instead of us contributing towards the cost of the restoration, the conservation, what if it was access to the, what is she, a heritage consultant, architect, the heritage architect? So if that's where you applied for the money, so you get to have a session with her and she can advise you rather than paying for that stuff to happen.
Any thoughts?
I think, to me, that's got quite a lot of value because I think that's where a lot of people, from what I can see, have gone a bit wrong.
That's where I would more like to see the money spent.
Rather than
Prevent people making mistakes, you know.
Yeah.
I think you could pick that up in any of those 4 categories. I agree with Monica. I think it's a good idea. But
Everybody. Scrolling down, moving on. Research.
Hang on, available to schools that you... Oh, no, sorry.
Research projects, moving on from the built form. I mean, is there the built form and the heritage advice to inform improvements or restoration? What do we think in terms of local projects, so the publication of books, pamphlets, walking tours, as a way of encouraging and supporting local research or local community groups to target heritage projects? So I'm thinking of a way of, I guess, empowering the community to use their resources and supporting them to document the history of Prospect, so that we then have a little bit of buy-in to that process. What are the thoughts around that as part of this? Or can we limit it initially to the built form?
But $10,000, I don't think got much of a choice.
I think the research is an excellent idea. I think it can be accessed through the community grants program.
Sorry, say that
I think it can be accessed through the community grants program and has in the past. I again, thinking for the first 10,000, keep it to something that's tangible, like tangible in the sense of building rather than research.
I think that's a good idea because we've done that with environment. We're sort of merged in the community grants, and that now includes money set aside for environment grants. And so I think that there could be another theme, part of that.
We could promote it.
Yeah. And I think it would add value to that community grant scheme that we've got.
So keep this tangible, keep the community grants for the research projects. Excellent. Well, that will certainly make it a little bit more straightforward in terms of narrowing that scope at least initially. Limits down the bottom, I'll jump forward. Maximum refund of 50% of the work, up to $2,000 per project per annum. Is that reasonable? Because we're not trying to fund the entire thing. Minimum project value of $1,000. So you'd need to present quotes to council. Our heritage advisor would need to be satisfied with that work.
That they're going to spend at least $1,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit. There's obviously a trickiness there. If Painter gives you a quote of $700, you say no, it's $1,000. Difference. It's something to consider.
Anyone else have similar concerns about putting on minimum value?
I personally would worry about a minimum. I'm not sure. It probably adds a whole lot of value. I think Ashley's right. If someone's close to the mark, we don't want to create perverse behaviour. So.
Yeah. Are we happy with the cap around the $2,000 mark?
Yeah. Can you just clarify the work up to $2,000 per annum, so we're not sort of indicating that, well, you can go then get another $2,000 next year, or lock in $2,000 worth of work over 3 years?
And I think that's
we might not have the grant.
It's really for that's in terms of prioritising the assessment. So if we get inundated with 94 applications and we pick the top 10 and we give it to them, and the next year we get 94 applications, we say, well, you got one last year.
Down the bottom.
We could discuss work with Council's Heritage Advisor. Is that a cost to Council?
Yes.
So I just go back to my point that we don't offer money for the restoration or the enhancement or whatever, the conservation. The grant is advice from the Heritage Advisor.
I think that could be certainly incorporated into it, so that we put a dollar value in terms of the time.
Well, it's just that the grant's already costing $10,000, and so if they're applying for materials and we have to take it to the Heritage Advisor, it's costing us more than $10,000. So how much is it, like a consultation, how much would that cost?
consultation, depending on how detailed it is, would be around the $450.
Is that like the first 15 minutes or something?
It's a bit longer than that.
Hopefully it's more than 15.
Well, I just think, I can't, it doesn't sit right with me that we put aside $10,000 for the grant and then there's a further cost on top that we haven't budgeted for and we really can't afford. So if they apply for
the grant program, that cost would eat into the program that's available to the community. Wouldn't vote for it. We'd need to factor that in.
I just think if they apply for the grant, then it's compulsory to have a session with the advisor and that becomes part of their application.
Unless they've already got expert advice themselves.
Does that seem like a reasonable approach to it?
Yeah, I'm in one breath I totally agree with Monica that they should do it, but there's also clever people out there, you know, in the history group or people that deal with antiques and time that might have that knowledge themselves or have gone down that path. I just, if it was someone like me, I'd say that'd be dead right because I'd need to know how old my brush fence was, you know.
We're saying that the decision making is discuss it with the council's heritage advisor and obtain a certificate of approval in principle. So someone has to pay for that and it's got to come out of the grant. It can't come out of any extra buckets because we don't have any extra buckets.
Well, then what sort of money are we talking up there then?
Well, we do currently have some heritage design guidelines, and council staff can do a review based on our experience, our knowledge, without engaging trusted. For when we start playing with sums of up to $2,000, I prefer to have a heritage advisor on board to really ensure that we're getting what we should be getting. So that would, by necessity, eat into that $2,000 maximum.
Most people are going to get $1,000. Take 400 out.
Overall $10,000, let's call it a provisional sum, the Heritage Grants Program. We can quarantine 2.5 for heritage advice, and that limits the overall fund to 7.5. And then we look at a review of how that's tracking in the new financial year or through the budget review process.
The other,
how much interest we receive.
the other thing, community rent grant is, say we set aside, $20,000 or whatever it is, $25,000, then out of that comes sort of $1,000 or something for promotion of. So we might be, say, setting $10,000 in the budget, but then now suddenly we've got to, are we going to pay for the promotion out of that grant?
We'll think about limiting the scope as much as we have in terms of people target. It's a letterbox drop.
Okay.
We print a...
So it's more targeted, okay.
Why not just in the in our paper, and that's it. If you don't read that, tough cookies. It doesn't cost a cent then. Well, I wouldn't diminish the fund by advertising.
No.
We put it out 4 times a year through the magazine.
And people have been clamouring for it as soon as we start tweeting about it.
Yeah.
All over.
Yeah, I don't think we need to otherwise spend money on that. I think on whether we use, I accept the point somebody made down there about, them getting advice from other people. We outsource our planning. Planners don't have to, applications don't have to come through our planners. They can be approved by, what do you call them? Private certified. So I probably, my immediate thought was, yes, let them all go through our heritage person. But if we outsource our planning to a approved certifier, I suppose it's just as reasonable that there are other heritage architects, some of which we use ourselves anyway, that they could use. As long as they're professional, I don't think we should.
You should say it's number 2. So we've stipulated it, and that cost has to come from somewhere.
Well, then we could change it. No, that's not stipulated, that's a guideline.
No, it's a decision making.
So this is
No.
how council administration make a decision on applications to access.
But this isn't set in concrete, is it? That's not what we have to do.
No.
No.
But this is a guide so that we...
I would have thought from a professional heritage advisor rather than council's heritage advisor.
Just a heritage,
Well, but you know, one that is
qualified heritage.
professional, qualified, whatever. But not somebody who's done a 3-week TAFE course.
I'm just very conscious of time, and that pretty much concludes the discussion without going into detail around that. What I can do is make that a little more vague with enough certainty that you can trust me. And leave it there, unless there's any burning issues.
We have Alan and Mark have both got to leave pretty much now, so that's a good time to finish off.
Well, I can take a bit longer now because
Well, I would like to bring this back to council, noting that it is something that was adopted by council in the annual budget. I don't think there's anything here that's too contentious, so I don't have any real qualms about bringing it to council during the caretaker period. Does anyone, I guess, well, I've got the governance manager table in the hot seat, and a number of elected members who've been upskilled.
Off the top of my head, I don't have a problem with the methodology going to council, but I wouldn't like it to be assessed or given out. But the methodology for the program, I think.
It's just a guideline of the grant application, so it should
When you say you wouldn't like what to be assessed,
Any application.
an application.
oh, of course, yeah. Well, that's through staff, though, isn't it? Why would they be held by? That does got nothing to do with elected members. Why would that come to a halt? We still build roads, we still do footpaths, we still do all that. As long as our decision making is done, and we hand it to staff, they're nothing. They got nothing to do with caretaker period.
But doesn't it come back to council for?
No. Why would it come back to us?
The intention is not to involve council in the actual application.
Absolutely, totally agree. So caretaker shouldn't be an issue.
It's not likely to happen until next February, then.
That's right. Well, I think we're not going to come across it as an issue. I get the principle.
So I'll go home and get my letterbox painted for that green.
Okay, you're right to move on to the next item then?
Special heritage paint,
Rick, could you go and get David for us?
lead paint, lead paint.
Then he's going to put one of those wooden plaques on.
Then you can take the kids on a walking tour and they can nick your letterbox.
My brush fence is that much short of my property because
Oh, you need a
the
grant.
old man next door, the post that was there in 1918, he said that was his property and he tried to fight the people putting up the brush fence. He's 90 years old. I said, let him have it. Let him have it. Don't worry about it. Stop the fence
It was
there.
90 in 1918.
Huh?
It was 90 in 1918.
No, he was.
It's not.
Before you two do leave, maybe just talk about the open discussion period. Just wanted to say that the Ice Bucket Challenge is happening this Friday. You would have heard about that or read about that?
Right.
Memorial Gardens. What do you want to explain what's happening, David?
Pay mine, donate mine.
Must be close.
Yeah. No, we're not there yet. We need some more money.
About $125.
We need another
Another few
$125.
bucks.
Started earlier when other people started doing it and people started paying, especially people with 6 kids.
I know.
Expect me to pay for you and 6 kids is...
No, I don't expect you to. Yeah, I do actually. But it's online, so get on board. Now Mark and I will be there. I think a few other staff have said they'll put their hands up. I've told Mark they can't have ice dunked on them unless they've raised some money. So that's my sort of amount.
Ice, it's ice water.
It's going to be warm ice.
Well, I hope so. So we'll be there talking about the donation amount that we've made. I haven't actually thought about who I should nominate. Is that part of the deal?
I think
I'm more interested in raising money. So if you've got any ideas about who you think we could touch up to get a few shekels out of them, then let me know. Or let Mark know, because he's raised bugger all. No, he's done a good job. Done a good job with the team. He's supposed to raise his own money, but never mind.
176 was still needed.
Yeah, 176. All right.
Donate. Mine's got $105, so $5 paid for the extra fees. Otherwise,
Right.
and over your own, they've got to pay for the credit card.
Oh, okay. All right. No worries. If you know anybody else who wants to donate or wants to get on board, then please send them our way. We'll do a bit of a thing on it, have a bit of fun, get a bit of promotion for the city as well. So we'll use it for that. And look, I just want to raise the money. So help us. Yeah. 12 o'clock Friday.
Who's pouring the water?
Whoever pays the most money.
Rory offered to take the day off school to pour it on your head.
Well, I bet he did. Yeah. I think currently it's between you and my wife and maybe somebody else. So.
Well, no, because I suggested that they put names into a hat and that some staff, lucky staff member, can pull out a...
queue of stuff in the way.
I'm delegating. Because I've got to go to work.
All right, thanks for that. Just before you go, anything from you?
Yeah, just very briefly, and I think something to be. On Friday, my mate Michael, his dog got attacked in the dog park up at Broadview there by a couple of staffies that are in there, and through Peter and that, it's being sorted out. They found where the dogs come from and all that. But the dogs are on their own, and the only reason I'm sort of bringing it up here is that we perhaps should look at, if people put dogs into that dog park, should they be with the dogs when they put them in?
Yeah, someone put them in there without being there.
Well, it's actually a bit of a, I don't want to really say because I think the lady might be a bit challenged. So there could be complications in that particular issue. But to me it brought up, and it will bring Michael back to my house many times now, because he had to take him to the vet and he's already dropped off the vet bills to me, 4 copies. So could we at some stage have a look at policy signage, I think, that says you have to be with the dogs, but I think if people put dogs in there, he wants to now carry an axe and a knife, and it's been explained that he can't in the dog park with an axe.
It's not a dog minding thing like the Lacorn used to have the the balls the dogs. Their kids there.
He actually got in and he got in. So that's where I wanted to go. So if we could have a look at some stage of maybe signage or whatever, that if you got dogs there, someone has to be.
Dogs have to be company.
We'll follow up.
For children in playgrounds, what I thought.
Okay, Scott, got one. Great. Thanks, Scott.
I just thought I'd let everyone know before Alan and Mark leave. On Sunday I met with David just to let him know that I'm not going to stand for a council election. So I just wanted to let everyone here know.
Not because we met.
On Father's Day, it was very nice. No, but I just wanted to do the right thing and let David and Mark know prior to everyone else. And just a personal decision, no other reason whatsoever. Just 3 years of campaigning has
Tired you out.
tired me out, 33, so I've got to look after oneself. So I just wanted to let everyone else know before.
Dan, you should have a word to Liberal Party for giving you the thumb job going up against bloody John Rao. What a terrible job they did.
Plenty of future ahead. And I just want to say at that junction, thank you, Scott, for your time on the council. It's been great to have you here representing that ward over there and the other side of the barbed wire, as some people unkindly call it, our friends from the east, I like to say.
And representing the suburb.
And I know you're hunting around for someone to replace you, and I really encourage you to find good people for us, point them our way, and we'll do our best to help them come on board. There might be one sitting behind you, you never know. And on behalf of council, thank you for everything that you've done, and we'll make sure we get a good send-off too before you.
I really enjoyed it. So, yeah. And look, I did have Curtis call me and text me and email me. And I said, look, on a personal note, I just a little bit upset that I didn't do it sooner, because I've been in Prospect since 1988, and growing up with the Mitchell family and Matthew Mitchell, it was sort of always, you know, I was never good enough to be there, and so yeah, I was just a bit ashamed I haven't done it. A little bit.
Oh, you've done it now. You've done it well.
Right. Yeah, that's it. To get off the bucket list.
So for everyone else, the nominations are still open until next.
Only 2 forms up there.
There's three now. No. Christina's is up there.
Don't come in at 11.
Why?
Yeah.
If there's a lot of nominations at 11 a.m, they'll get worked through one by one. And if 12 o'clock comes on the dot, even if you've come in with them before 12,
No one in the
they have to be processed.
And what if you have a heart attack at 11:30?
I won't be doing it. There'll be someone from the next year.
In the past, staff used to do it.
We do it up until 11,
All right.
Yeah.
and they come in and take over up until 12.
Oh.
Precisely for that reason.
In case you have a heart attack.
Right, they didn't used to do that.
Okay, thanks, Alan.
Okay.
I don't know, 10 minutes. 10 minutes, yep.
2000 they didn't.
Oh, sure.
They came in at
Okay.
Yeah, well, smart.
Trying to raise $1,500, not for you to fly to Fremantle.
Good luck.
Yeah.
See you, bloke.
Okay, we return to the final part of the workshop, which is the expert panel. Now you want to go home.
We're in my house.
Who's going to entertain us?
The expert for all the
The
views.
cake food.
Discussion won't take long at all. How many times have you said that?
You already get the wind up.
Panel of what?
So the expert panel has been tasked with a review of the planning system and expanding the scope of that to see how it relates to other legislation, other areas. How can we improve the planning system? Because despite my efforts, apparently the planning system isn't working well enough. So the panel has undertaken some consultation, established some reference groups, heard from many, many members of the community, filtered those suggestions, turned them around into some ideas for reform, grouped those into areas and some suggestions. They've tried to offend everyone in the process, I think, because when you look at 27 different ideas for reform, you're not going to make everyone happy. And so elements of it obviously speak to potentially reducing the authority of council, also reducing the authority of the minister in some respects. We're also looking at improving community consultation, but trying to define when we undertake that consultation process and how rigorous it is. So it's really cherry-picking some of the ideas, grouping them, expanding them. So they've come up with the its second public report, Our Ideas for Reform. I've distributed a couple of summaries of that to elected members previously, one via email, which was a brief synopsis, and the other one which was attached to the workshop agenda, which was a more rigorous interrogation of what was proposed and perhaps some draft comments in response to provide both to the LGA and to the expert panel. The reason I'm confident that we're not going to spend a lot of time on this is because it's such a big task to go through the whole document in detail that I don't think we need to. I think we need to just concentrate on those areas that are particularly pertinent to City of Prospect and the way we see the planning system can work for us in the future. So what I'd like to do is really just pick out those, out of the 27, which are the ones that you actually want to discuss. So do it by exception rather than working our way through the whole document. If we do that, we'll be here for weeks. So I trust that you've had a look through. We can, if you'd like, bring up the broad areas, but I'm sure that some of you have areas that you'd like to discuss in some detail and have a chat about what sort of comments we should make in response. So I'll open it to the floor, really, in terms of which areas should we target and should we discuss tonight.
I'll open the bidding because I'll need another few minutes if I can. So number 14, consultation. It's a really critical one, and my time on DAP, it's been interesting and an eye-opener in terms of when developments applications can be consulted with the community, whether it's category 1, 2 or 3, who gets consulted. And then there's a little chestnut where if you have a consultation process but then there's a change to the planning, if the applicant wants to change something, it doesn't have to, they can put an extra floor on it or they can change the purpose of the construction. We've seen a few of those. So I just think that's one element of it, about who it is you talk to. The other element to me is how you do it. And I was in Brisbane recently, and they've got, on their vacant blocks of land, they'll have a sign with the plan and all the issues about that particular development. So you can actually be on site and see it. It's almost like a signboard. Of course, if people want to see a plan, they have to come down here and look at it over the counter. We can't do it electronically. So there's those sort of challenges which people keep talking about, copyright and infringement of privacy. I think if you're going to put an application for development, that goes with the territory. So I'm just going to kind of say something and run really, but they're the sort of things I'd be really keen to make sure we say something about.
Really agree.
That's my starting.
So at the moment they are ideas for reform, so they haven't drilled down into specific detail, although I noted at 14.1, notices about development to be attached to properties as part of the consultation process. So in some instances, the expert panel has drilled down to that almost micro level in terms of how they anticipate elements of that consultation process are going to be improved. In other areas, they're a little bit more high-level strategic vague.
Yeah, about that. It's about that issue about we have very strict rules about who we consult with. So I'm just thinking of the example when I put up the Golden in my place. It was on the boundary, so my neighbour got notified. I think the neighbour on the other side who couldn't even see the boundary got notified. The neighbour at the side got notified, but the person 2 doors down the road didn't because they weren't in the. I mean, that's just ridiculous. I mean, why wouldn't you say, well, common sense should prevail? If you've got major development applications, why do we limit it to the people just around that location where people 3 streets away or 5 streets away might be really impacted by it? So look, I agree with what you're saying. This is a very strategic document, but the principle for me is consulting with the people that are going to be affected by it, irrespective of whether they live 1 door away or 3 streets away. And I don't think you can. That might be a case-by-case thing, even, or a bit of a judgment call from planning staff.
Part of this discussion is identifying where we see the priorities, because all of these ideas have their positive aspects to them. But where do we think changes should be prioritised? So that very change you're talking about in terms of notices and in terms of the scope of notification can be made to the existing development regulations. So there's a mechanism already in place. We don't need this planning reform to come about, the full suite of 27 ideas, in 5-10 years' time, with that being the last cab off the rank. That could be the first cab off the rank, an easy win, let's say, in terms of the planning reform. So we could pick up on priorities.
I agree with Mark, and I mean, even now I'm signed up to some group that provides a service that notifies you by email of things that have come up to council or things. That most of them are no. You can nominate whether you want it within 5 kilometres, 10 kilometres, 20 kilometres, things like that. So I think it's already out there, but not many people seem to either know about it, be aware of it. So I think we should be trying to use being a digital, hub. We should be, really trying to use that sort of technology. So anybody that can sign up to it gets notified, and I just think that's something that could be looked at. And I agree. I did see on one of our blocks, they did have a notification of what was happening, but it was under health and safety. It wasn't under like notifying you. But I thought, now I'm aware that that's happening there. So yeah, I do think that there should be more effort put into and putting a plan that's on sign as well, like they have up in Brisbane, and I think other states have undertaken that. Can't remember now. The other thing I'd like to is about this idea of the regional stuff. So I'm against anything that takes more control away from the local area. Well,
that's 2 and 15.
Yeah.
Maybe in terms of a bit of a structure, let's see if anyone would like to withdraw item 1, planning reform 1 for discussion. Any takers? Just so we can rip through it, establish some structure around the conversation.
I will, just to say that the idea of a commissioner sounds wonderful, provided there's still not a department and a minister. So it's one or the other. I'd prefer a commissioner who's not
independent.
Who's independent, yeah. Who's not kind of politically motivated. Who takes the politician's policy, says, okay, now I'm going to, in an administrative sense, make that happen, and can't be swayed by lunches or whatever else might be, tantalising. Works off of fact and reports and information coming from local communities to achieve the government's objectives. But I think it's only going to work if the department and minister are taken out of the process. Otherwise, we'll have an extra layer of bureaucracy, and it'll take even longer to get our amendments through, which I'd absolutely oppose. More likely, yeah.
I think maybe the commissioner works with councils and not state government.
But the proposal is that the pollies get elected, and that's democracy. The pollies decide what the policy is. So they might say 30-year plan is our policy, and they give that to the commissioner and say, go and make that happen. The commissioner's in charge with changing development plans or working with communities to say, you need to work with this policy. If you don't like the policy, throw the government out at the next election. But until then, that's the policy. My job is to implement it. Right? So we don't get caught up in this maelstrom of he said, she said, or my interpretation, or
political football.
That's right.
Yeah. It should be further removed from all that.
But if it's the minister and the commissioner and the department, that's just adding layers that are unnecessary.
There is a handy little reference in the report, the Reform Ready Reckoner, about the key leadership roles. So the minister would set regional targets and directions, approve regional strategies, and approve the Charter of Citizen Participation. In terms of the planning and the planning rules, the minister would approve the state planning code additions as recommended by the Planning Commission, but can initiate changes to regional planning schemes in limited cases. So there would still, the minister would still retain some capacity, but it would certainly be informed by the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission would do the majority of the grunt work, but the minister maintains that responsibility for the Development Act and the Development Regulations more than the actual scheme.
Doesn't it propose call-in rights rather than sign-off rights? Because at the moment, we can't get change to our development plan without the minister themselves signing off on the statement of intent. And then we go through the motions, and they've got to sign off again on the final plan. It's 2 sign-offs by the minister to amend our plan.
So under the proposed reforms, the Planning Commission or regional planning boards would have the ability, the regional planning boards would sign off on minor changes to regional planning schemes by councils. Whereas the Planning Commission, there are a number of levels of it, the Planning Commission signs off on major changes to the regional planning schemes. So really the Planning Commission and the regional planning boards would be responsible for sign-off. So that would be removed from the minister?
Yeah, so if it's converting our stuff from our text to use the library rather than our text, and we were happy with that, the regional board would sign it through. If it's a major change to our corridor zones like we've just done, that would go to the Commissioner.
Yeah.
But provided we're within the 30-year plan umbrella, it wouldn't need to go to the Minister. That's correct. I would be happy with that.
So the Minister would set the regional targets and directions. So in a regional sense, you've got a population target perhaps, and then it's up to the Planning Commission
and us to work it out.
Within that framework, if we're going to go down that track, what we really need to know is that that's going to be a fairly major structure they set up. It's not going to be a one-man job. And right now it's not costing us a cracker. It goes to the Minister, his department look at that, they fund that. If we separate that job out and you've got a significant number of people working in the department, and I imagine it would be a significant number, council's going to be paying for that. Ratepayers are going to be paying for that.
Well, then that's condition our support.
Pardon?
Condition our support.
Well, but it's reasonable to know what the hell we are letting ourselves in for cost-wise. If it adds $2,000 per application, it's going to be a hell of a bullet to bite. If it writes out it wouldn't take much. We don't get that much in on planning anyway. If it writes out 60 or 70% of that cost, that kicks a hole in our budget. So I think that's a real crucial factor to decide on where to go. The extent to which we've got to fund how big a department.
Yeah, and that is a comment that we can make in response, is that we don't want an additional cost burden to council. At the moment,
well, but it's an utterly crucial one.
Yeah.
It's almost a right up front before we go any further. Otherwise, what's the point? Why would you go down this enormous great track to find, well, guess what, it's going to cost you $1,000 an application?
So we wouldn't want it to cost us any more than it does now.
Well, 5% more. I mean, it's got some idea of what that cost structure might be.
Oh, that's a fair point.
It's probably going to be, you'd have to think it'd be a significant sized department.
Well, I would imagine that the people involved in development plan amendments in the department would move to work for the Commissioner.
Well, that's
what I'm saying. You don't want both. You don't want, Fred, Chick and Mary. That's crazy stuff.
That's great, but it is state government.
Well,
they will just put them somewhere else.
Got to see the money supporting it if it's not another layer.
Just picking up on that separation of roles, or I guess the additional layer. At the moment, if there's height changes proposed in an area, the Minister signs off on it. Under this scheme, the Commission would sign off on it. So the Minister might put a population target, but won't be responsible ultimately to say, no, I think we should have 3 stories or 4 stories or 5 stories. That would be effectively delegated to the Commission. So the Minister wouldn't have that level of involvement. We wouldn't go into that level of detail on the issue. So in terms of the comment that I put down for item 1 was support for establishing a State Planning Commission to provide advice to the Minister and Cabinet and administer the planning system, express our support for a planning system that strengthens a whole of government approach and integration of planning and infrastructure provision, which is broadly reflected in the government endorsed non-statutory strategic template that is the Integrated Transport Land Use Plan. It's important that the Commission works closely with local government and council should be provided with a stronger level of engagement with the Commission than what we currently have with the Development Assessment Commission and Development Policy Advisory Committee. Because at the moment, council signs amendments to the plan, hands them over, and waits patiently, and then agitates and waits patiently.
Can you make it stronger that it's not only important that they actually do it, whatever you said with council?
So rather than important that the Commission works closely, it's essential. So that's a relative. And the support for establishing a state planning commission is contingent on there being no additional cost to council, and prefer or really appreciate that the commissioner will be independent of the minister.
Because it can't be an extra layer in the...
Well, there's going to be partly a layer because of some of those decisions that, but it's the extent to which, whether it's...
All right, we can make any comment we like. Logic says to you that it's going to end up administratively being an extra layer, but I think we should make a strong point that it's not going to work if it adds another layer.
So the minister just hands over the 30-year plan, end of story, or...?
Well, the way it's been described to me is yes, and the minister can keep an eye on what's happening, and the minister reserves the right to call in something. So Prospects Corridor Plan, you know what? You've done a lot of work on it. That one I'm going to call in through, as I can call in a regulation, similar to the way Mark Parnell came to talk to us about calling in that regulation about changing the rules about the approval process. And then the minister will go, right, just that one I'm going to have a closer look at. But all the rest of them, just keep going. All right.
Which is going to need a Department of Staff to...
Quite right. We've got to have reasons to call it in. We've got to explain what's going on. And the minister won't want to do that with everything.
No, what's going to trigger him calling it in?
Well, there are some parts about government that you can't do much about. Could be anything.
No, but I mean, you know, he needs to have a...
He'd have to justify it.
Yeah, it needs to be...
Yeah. And justify it in terms of how it doesn't fit the minister's expectation of the policy.
Yeah, it's not just his because he doesn't like something that's happening.
Sure. Like a certain council that E starting with B. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think I've got enough on number one to refine it.
Right.
Number two was identified as what to be dragged out. So, create a network of regional planning boards.
As in DAPs or...
Well, the regional planning boards, they're not DAPs. They're boards that provide advice on sort of the strategic direction and coordination of planning functions. So the constitution of those boards could be comprised of elected members or independent members nominated by council or by the State Planning Commission. It's a little bit loose in terms of the composition of the planning board. It's more prescriptive around what they'll actually do.
And what do they do?
Have we got any feel for how big a region they're talking about?
3 metro. So they've got no fixed view. When asked, they said, well, we could probably have 8 across the state and 3 metro. Now, LGA has 5 regions across regional South Australia, which work reasonably well. But LGA doesn't regionalise in the metro area. State does, but not, I don't see it.
Just to give a pre-say on what the board will do.
What will the board do? They will respond to directions from the Planning Commission, which in turn are informed by the Minister, to amend regional planning schemes that inform potentially local development plans, prepare community engagement plans in terms of the policy change that's undertaken. They're almost like the administration of the planning commission to a degree. They maintain the regional planning schemes and can initiate changes to those schemes and sign off on minor changes to planning schemes by councils.
It's a bit like the is it a natural resource? I'm thinking of what some NRM. I mean, I'm not all in so much in favour of all this regionalisation.
So this is another layer of people.
Another bureaucracy.
Commission.
Yeah, I mean, it's all going to cost a lot of money. I wouldn't mind. I just don't, at this stage, have any understanding of a reason. And when I read that, I thought, yeah, there's a lot of words here, but I'm none the wiser.
Hasn't been costed either in any way at this stage. So.
No, but I couldn't even really work out what. I mean, what do I want? I mean, if Prospect... I mean, a lot of these things to me will only work if we decide to amalgamate into those areas. But why would you have people sitting from 3 other areas be deciding, making decisions on behalf of Prospect? Prospect is 2 votes out of maybe 10, but it's considering Prospect.
That doesn't require amalgamations. The Riverland Council...
I'm not saying I'm looking for it, but I'm saying it makes more sense if you're talking about a region being a council.
Oh, well, sure. But even then you'd have a separation between the regional council versus the regional planning commission. So they wouldn't be the same thing. One's a check on the other. The Riverland have a combined development assessment panel at the moment that, from all accounts, from what I hear back from our colleagues, works very, very well. This would take it to another level. In fact, there's 2 parts to this, as I understand, Chris. One is the assessment process. Just put that to one side. The regional body would be like a mini commission or a mini department that would have people allocated to it that would, say, take the Riverland, they'd be experts on development and planning issues in the Riverland, and they would live it and breathe it every day. So the council said, I think we should do this. We've got an industrial zone over there. We've got a potential employer coming in. How do we make that work? The plan doesn't suit it. Can we have your help to change the plan to make it work? That mob says, we know about that issue, and yeah, we can get straight onto it. I'll call my colleagues in state in transport and health and whatever, and we'll get it through. At the moment, you have to go through a development amendment process to a central department that deals with the whole state. And you don't have that sense of ownership and knowledge of local issues. In the metro area, it gets a little more interesting. I mean, I kind of get it at Riverland level.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe West Coast level, I could kind of, you know. When you think about us, it would probably be that the councils, Marion, Mitcham, Unley, Burnside, right around us, Port Adelaide, Enfield, to the coast are one region, and that's considered kind of inner suburbia. And that panel deals with, or that regional commission, deals with the inner metropolitan area and does the planning amendments and all those sort of things within that structure. Now, part of me says, I guess that could work. Part of me says, I like the way that that mob would know more about the transport network and the public transport issues that that we currently get a response from state about. They would be much more regionalised in that sense. Part of me says, well, it's a bit distant. It's a bit distant. When you start taking it to an assessment level as well, that panel would be like a DAC for that region. I think that's probably too far removed from our community for them to feel like they're influencing that.
Yeah, and who do residents go to?
Well, they'll come to us. We would still have a role as the holder of the development plans, and we can initiate changes. One part of this says we take our changes to the regional body who could approve them or not, or we could have that discussion with them. That bit I kind of think, I get that. It's how much more they do that becomes a problem.
I mentioned briefly the Integrated Transport and Land Use Plan, which was planning, transport and infrastructure, looking at how planning zones and the future plan and provision of transport infrastructure as well as other infrastructure should develop over time, and how the two have got to relate. Now, that was undertaken at the state government level, and it was a very, its early iteration that did come to council identified some high density nodes right in the middle of our historic conservation area, which spoke to the separation between state and local. The idea behind the regional planning boards is to fill in that middle level so that the integrated transport and land use plan is actually overseen by a board that has a much closer connection and appreciation to those regions which as yet are undefined. Those regional planning boards would appoint a regional development assessment panel who would be aware of those sorts of implications. So it wouldn't be as removed as a development assessment commission when undertaking assessment. It would be a bit more local. But they would only consider, they still wouldn't consider an awful lot of the applications. So currently we receive 500 development applications a year, ballpark figure. We might put 3 to 5 of those to the panel each month. So we might see 50 applications a year to DAP. So that's 10%. A regional DAP, depending on the delegations, might not see that many. They might say, look, everything of regional significance we'll put to the regional DAP, but everything else can be dealt with by council and council administration. Leaves it in that slightly grey area, what we do with those bits that are in between. But under the current legislation, there's call-in rights by the Coordinator General to call in any development that's over $3 million. There's development within the urban corridor zone that exceeds 4 stories, goes to the Development Assessment Commission. So these are already in place. I guess this is our chance to influence or emphasise the importance of how what the trigger is, because that's undefined. So in terms of our feedback at the moment, it's we need to be sure about that trigger for the regional development assessment panels to get involved. They're not going to consider all 500 development applications, depending on how much, in terms of other reform, how much of the system is codified. So when we speak to the community about having clear guidelines or clear rules around development, so that if you tick that box and that box and that box and that box, you should get approval. If you fail to tick all those boxes, then you shouldn't. There's clear rules, a clear structure. That's what the code is all about. So if you satisfy the code, you shouldn't get rid of merit assessment. So there's a spectrum, I guess, to the type of development that council receives and how that assessment process is undertaken. And I guess in this instance, for regional DAPs, the devil will certainly be in the detail of where the trigger actually is. Because if it's a $3 million value or if it's over 4 stories, then we might see that those types of development that have the greatest potential to have quite significant local impacts because of their regional importance aren't being considered by council DAP, they're being considered by regional DAP.
Sorry, number 2 talks about the regional boards, and there's a lot about that I think could be useful to us. It doesn't talk about assessment at all. Item Reform 15 talks about assessment. So I think we should separate out the two quite clearly. There's a lot about Item 2, Reform 2, that I think is worth exploring to give us people who better understand what we're trying to achieve strategically. They're suggesting a metropolitan sub-region as well, due to the special needs of the really inner city, which we would form part of. But I need a huge amount more definition before I'll be confident.
I mean, to me, it makes more sense. Like, you know, we had the inner metro plan, you know, because there were more common planning matters that affected that particular area, be it the minister or one of certain town. But Yeah, I mean, we've got sort of different, there are different needs of, like, say, for example, if it's a Lights View, you know, like a new greenfield development as compared to, you know, our...
I'm struggling myself, David, and I wouldn't mind some better understanding of the benefit. You know, public transport was one you mentioned, but we'd be the envy of all of Adelaide public. All the buses end up running through Prospect, whether we like it or not.
We still can't get on them.
You can't get on because they're full of peak hours.
Sure. But
You look at them go past.
sure, that's quantum, you know, more buses. That it's not as though it's different. You know, the further you go out on the pie, it's more buses going sideways and all sorts of things. Us, more buses, end of story. It's a simple solution. But beyond that, you're seeing something I'm not sure I see, and that's what I'd...
Okay. Well,
because we are 8,500 houses and 600 shops, and that's it.
a really good example is our corridor rezoning project, where we chose to work with the department and three other councils to come up with a consensus around the policy framework and a common timetable. So there could be, instead of a competition about things or lots of different policy outcomes, there was a single stream of policy outcomes. And the differences were evidenced in some of the criteria, such as the layback to the back fences or the heights. We got the lowest heights, other councils got much higher heights than we did. But essentially it was done in one process. To me, that was a very good process for us, because we were able to learn off all those other councils and them off us as to what the key issues were to look out for and how to get the best policy outcome. So that looks to me like a regional process. And we had dedicated staff within the department, I heard, that were working with us. And then they got to know our issues pretty intimately. So that was a benefit. In the absence of that, we go on our own to the department and ask for, you know, an account manager, so to speak, who just deals with us, not knowing what else they're dealing with or what other development plan amendments are happening around the place, unless we call some kind of conference of some other council we've heard about doing a similar thing. Not because people are hiding it from us, but because there's not a regional coordination approach to how planning is implemented on the ground.
I agree with that, but that was a generational 30-year plan. And it was fantastic, I think, to be part of it. But having got that in place, what next? What?
Oh, already? We've got on our schedule, Heritage. The next one, we want to do a complete look at our residential plan.
We're waiting for the Heritage result.
Well, hence my desire to speed things up, and I think a regional body would be quicker. But we want to do, our very next one is to have a look at our whole residential development plan. And I think if we did that in isolation from Walkerville, why would we do that? Why would we try and get a common policy framework at least through the Eastern Regional Lines? Because then our planners can talk to each other, you can swap workload around, you can start talking about having more efficiency in how you use your key resources. It just makes more sense. So that's another benefit from having a regional body. And I agree with Chris. Our inner city, we've got more older houses. I don't know about our heritage density per hectare, but it's probably higher than the outer metropolitan areas. And we have main roads that probably aren't big enough relative to outer suburbs. We've got things that are colossally huge with big road reserves and freeways, and any of that. With all the public transport jamming itself into the city, whereas you're quite right, in the outer suburbs it's fingering out into kind of almost obscure routes. We've got a parklands belt that none of us pay any attention to in a planning sense when we absolutely should. There's a whole heap of reasons why I think working regionally makes a lot more sense. I mightn't have structured it like they have, but I kind of think I'd like to continue that discussion, because I think that could be useful to our community.
And I think we're going to really need to have a rethink of traffic management, given our new main road policies and high street policies. I think we're seeing that bubbling up already.
Yeah.
With the first cap off the rank, so to speak. So, you know, I think that we're not going to be alone in those considerations.
No, no.
So I think that's probably going to be one of the bigger issues if we look at the totality of planning, but also the totality over transport and traffic management.
In particular.
Yeah. So, with a view to the future planning, which we should be looking at, and when we're planning, So I think there are those things that there are, considerations for us here. It may not be the same consideration for somewhere out, or different consideration out in the Barossa or the Riverland, or down the Beaver Peninsula or somewhere, or Fluoro.
In terms of a summary of this discussion, I guess regional cooperation is positive. There are some benefits to it. But we caution against simply creating another level of bureaucracy. We want to continue the discussion so that we can get far greater definition around the centres of the region and the role of the boards and the role of council within that.
Well, that to me is a crucial one, the role. I think, as David pointed out some things, try and determine where they should be looking. And I think David enunciates it fairly well, that those sort of issues, the planning one, I think, is the crucial one in terms of working across the experience of the councils that surround us, and maybe going out something in that pie chart, because that's what we feed. They feed all of theirs into ours, and how we better handle that. I wouldn't mind us being fairly specific, at least to guide them, at least into the areas we think they should be involved in.
Well, and that could be, we've spoken about transport or key infrastructure, public transport, but it could extend to education and health, social services, recreational facilities, open space, connectivity, all those things.
Health as in environmental health.
You could do that too, but why wouldn't you say that region can have a sensible discussion about the relationship between the Royal Adelaide and the Queen Elizabeth and the Women's and Children's, and wouldn't we add some value to that discussion because our community used them? And how do you? And I know Health are having that discussion already. They're starting to move things around. Why wouldn't that regional body say, you know what, we've looked at the patterns of movement and where people go and come from, where they're going to live, where the density is going to increase and where it's not. Here's where the health demand is going to be. Here's the ageing bits versus the younger bits.
Social health.
So you could start working regionally on a policy platform that isn't just about planning on where you build a house or a shop. It's about planning on the extent of how you deliver all of your government services. Why wouldn't you say we want to stretch it rather than just restrict it to planning?
I think that gives me enough to tailor the comments in response to reform number 2. Conscious of time, we should probably jump to reform 15, taking the next steps towards independent professional assessment, builds on the discussion that I segued into. Regional gaps have the potential to improve, so this is my broad overview of it. Regional gaps have the potential to improve decision making across the regions, although removing council elected members from the decision making process may be politically sensitive. Triggers for assessment by a regional gap need to be clearly defined and agreed by councils. So I guess on that, who wants to lead off some?
Can I just chuck in some facts? The assertion is that local interests skew the outcomes. The evidence suggests otherwise. And I think the LGA stats show that 0.05% of council decisions were overturned by the courts last year. 0.05 or 1%. So the evidence suggests that councils get it right the vast majority of times. So I think the question should go back, what problem is Reform 15 trying to solve? Because it's not evidence through poor decision making. And I think unless we know what the problem is, how can you suggest a solution? Secondly, on the issue of stats, if our own team is referring 10% of applications to the DAP a year, or 50, you could presume Walkerville's referring 20. Do the maths. That regional body is going to have hundreds of applications a year, and potentially, 100 a month? This is going to make an administration that, are they actually going to pay attention to those things, given that you only refer the contentious ones up? Like, to me, it just seems, if it's going to pick up the workload that councils currently refer, it doesn't seem like it's workable. And there's a real danger that board will just be overwhelmed by the workload and wash a whole heap of things through without pulling them out of the agenda. And you've got to think, well, where's the quality of the decision making on contentious things?
Or it would just take longer.
It will take longer.
Get to consider everything.
Cost us more.
So I don't get, from a statistics point of view, I don't get it.
Yeah, I think they tend to work in regional areas where there's less development applications that need to be considered. But perhaps they are of those the larger schemes that are being considered. Whereas in a metropolitan context, perhaps for Prospect, it's not a priority. So part of this discussion is where do we think the prioritise some of these reforms? And if we think, I think our DAP's doing a good job at delivering outcomes that are good for the local community and good for, I guess, the region, and delivering on council's strategic plan, really.
The one thing I'd like to ask a question of maybe Scott and Ashley is, being on the DAP member, does that fetter at all your ability to act as an elected member? Do you feel that it limits you to be a genuine elected member if a resident came to talk to you about a particular development?
You can't talk to them. You can't talk to them. So I don't have a problem. I just explain. I don't feel under any pressure at all. I simply work on the basis if I don't get elected, I don't get elected. And I go by what the book tells me to go by.
I've heard one of the justifications I've heard of going to a regional panel structure with independence is that elected members can then focus on being elected members.
I've always been a great believer a council's job, and I don't think most councils spend enough time on it, is developing the development plan and making it the very best document they can so that anybody should be able to interpret it. It really shouldn't need councillors to tell people what their own plan says. If you do a good enough job on your own plan, you should be able to handle it to experts, like mostly we do. We have our planners and they don't do anything that they can't go outside of our development plan. Even if it goes to DAC, they have to work within our development plan. They cannot create their own rules. Our development plan is signed off by the minister. None of those bodies can go past the minister's sign-off. So for me, the key is to make sure your plan is tight. It's what you want for your community or what your community wants through consultation. And if you do that job well enough, you should be able to hand it over to experts. And we've seen ourselves, and I'm sure Scott would agree, some of the results we've got through having experts involved rather than just councillors have been amazing in some of the quality improvements. They see things that Mark and I and Scott will never see in terms of they can interpret those drawings at far greater level. And the results have been fantastic. So the key is that those boards have the expertise. If they're just another bunch of people, just planners, not good enough. I want architectural expertise as well. I want heritage expertise because that's worked very well for us. The key is your development plan.
And I think just to add to Ashley's comments is, I understand where the regional areas are coming from because it is such smaller areas, and they're going to make decisions that one person removed, we most probably know about, where we most probably don't have that local council in the metropolitan area. But it's just, I think they just need to take the approach that I think we take here, where we remove ourselves from the situation and we refer matters to Chris that we know, I think even before they are going to come to that, where I had a tree removal and I referred them to Chris. So, because I know that it will eventually end up here. So just removing yourself and knowing your responsibilities, I think that's more what the regions should be focusing on than being, I guess knowing someone that they're going to say no to. And I think Ashley said it once before, I think, well, don't go on council then, so if that's the case. But having the architects and the town planner on ours has certainly helped quite a lot. So I don't think we should change that.
I mean, a lot of people complained about us going to DAP. A lot of councillors did. And yet it's improved the quality of the development out of sight.
How many years ago would that have been that we moved over to a DAP? 5 or 6? Yeah.
All of last, it was in all of last term.
Okay,
8 years, I think. But there was, many councillors complaining all the way through that it was going to happen. And yet, meeting after meeting after meeting, councillors would knock things back. And you'd say to them, one councillor in particular who knocked everything back, I'd say, why? What in the development plan allows you to... Remembering most of the developers are just residents of Prospect, wanting to build on the house or whatever, not great big fat developers. And why did you knock it back? I didn't like it. No. Where in the development plan did they, you hand somebody the development plan, they build to your plan, and then you knock them back? It's just disgraceful. We did it time after time, which is why the job was taken away from us. But I think the end result for the Prospect has been fantastic to get that input.
Can I say, I think this is a hammer to crack a walnut, this solution. In fact, I don't think it actually solves the problem in the way that they think. You could end up with independent members on a panel who become able to be influenced in ways that you can't control. You've got all sorts of other issues going on. There are other ways to deal with that legally, but it is possible for independent members to be influenced in ways which provide outcomes that nobody actually wants. Right? So it's not like they're angels sent from heaven. I think there are a number of complex issues here that need to be fixed, and the reforms go a long way towards this. One is that applications that are complex are referred to the panel because they're not easily foreseen within the development plan. What would be better is to have development plans that are clearer, easy to understand, that make it crystal clear what will be accepted and what won't be accepted. So less needs to go to a panel of people to have a think about, should we or shouldn't we? 2 issues are important. One is, you've got to be able to read a development plan and understand it. Well, I've been in this game a long time. I was looking at a development plan today in another council for an industrial site, which I think would be pretty straightforward. Can you have a factory or not? I had to look in 5 places in that development plan to work out what I could or could not refer the client to. Now, it's a pretty simple task, but accessing information is quite complex.
I don't think we write them well from a cross-reference point of view.
So there's one reform that suggests that all plans should go online and that you can drill into multiple layers by linking all the information together. They can sit in different chapters, but the way you use it links it and makes it a lot easier. I think so the ease of understanding plans is a key issue in getting applications that fit the plan, rather than don't fit the plan, they're trying to shove it through the panel to get it approved, right? Because they think, I love this project, and we go, it doesn't fit the plan, send it to the panel. Right? So we cut out a lot of that. The second part of the problem is the on-merit process. For goodness sakes, if a plan says it's got to be black, not white, why on earth can't we say, hello, it's not black? No. Sorry. There are 20 criteria to meet. We've only met 19 of them. I'm sorry. Come back tomorrow. And because the merit process allows things to get through, it waters down the development plans, and it means we end up with things before a panel to try and adjudicate. Right? So the whole purpose of the panel is this fuzzy zone. Well, I'm trying to say, get rid of the fuzzy stuff, make it clearer, easier. The next issue is, this issue about whether you have elected members or experts, or a mix of both as we've got. I think the mix seems to work pretty well. I was very unhappy with the total elected members before, and I made no secret about that, and I kind of agree with Ashley, it's better now. If the things that get referred to the panel are so refined that they really, really are technically quite complex, because we've tidied up understanding the plan, we've tied up this merit nonsense, then perhaps experts might be better than some elected members because it'd be highly technical. But we're not at that point yet. I think the balance works pretty well. The fourth issue is local versus regional. About whether you have these fuzzy decisions made locally with people who understand the locality to a large extent, or whether you make them remotely by people who understand the strategic context that they sit in. And I'm kind of concerned about that. I think if it's a regional sized project, say for instance it's we wanted to make a huge sporting hub, a velodrome, maybe that should go to a regional body, maybe. But if we want to develop an apartment building or a cinema block on Prospect Road in our village heart, well, we know to think back to front and inside out, and you know the panel can actually have a reasonable chance of turning up and standing there or driving around and getting it and having a scratch and sniff. I can see the value of local, can't quite get a grip on why you'd send that regionally. So for me, there's a lot inside this question, and therefore I think just getting elected members off the panel and making it regional isn't, like, I don't know what that's trying to solve. And until I know the problem, I'm not going to agree that it's the solution.
And on that thing about, I've still got a niggle about residents out there who are quite often, the most affected by these things. It's like a little secret society of having our DAP panel, that you're not allowed to. Why? There was a time there when we had the old method that you all had to be together as a group, that panel, whether it's elected members or not, so that if you went on site, you weren't allowed to go as a single elected member and go and have a look at it. You had to go as a group so that you all got the same information, feedback at the same time. Now, I don't see why we shouldn't be allowing our DAPs to be able to, if they're all there together at the same time, to be meeting with the residents and the developers,
Can't meet the developer though. You can go on site, but you can't meet the developer.
That's under the current plan, but I'm saying let's blow your little minds a little bit more and saying, why can't you get together, you're all together at the same time, same room, sharing the same information, and you're hearing the issues. I mean, currently we've got, our residents want to have a look at a thing, they go to our planning staff, but the planning staff are the ones who are actually writing the report. So, why wouldn't you be saying, well, hey, hold on a bit, isn't there, what's happening there?
You start to put, though, an awful lot more pressure on a DAP when, as well as coming to their meetings, they've then got to put time aside. All of them have got jobs to meet residents and then another time to meet on-site or meet the developer. I mean,
well,
how does that work with a DAP when you suddenly increase to at least 3 meetings per DAP?
I think I've done that before though. When I was on DAP, there were twice we went to site as the meeting.
Sure,
yeah.
But that was the site, but not the developer. Only the site. Not at all. What Christine's suggesting is set aside a time for everybody to meet residents, set a time aside for everybody to meet the developer, and you suddenly have every DAP is 3 meetings.
Not necessarily, because how many get to go there?
What?
That.
More and more and more. But what, four last night?
More and more are becoming contentious. More and more are
no.
about with the merit.
No, they're just bigger. No, they're just mostly it's bigger proposals. Multi-story, well, 3-story.
I think that does pick up, or it is captured under another reform about a staged assessment process, and I think that's where it almost ties into this discussion, where I mean, I guess this could be an improved method of communication between the DAC representatives and applicants. We end up saying approval in principle, so it does go to the DAC. The DAC sees it at an early iteration rather than when it's been finely tuned and polished by capital administration. They see it early on. They say, okay, an approval in principle in terms of land use and the overall form, we go back and massage the finer details, which is similar to the process that's undertaken by the government architect when they first see a proposal that gets massaged before it finally gets to the DAC. So I think there's some merit in having a look at, basically in terms of response, what I'm hearing is that regional DAPs aren't necessary. There might actually be some problems in establishing regional DAPs because of the workload that they face. We might end up with worse decisions. Elected members do have the ability to separate the roles and distinguish between being a DAP member and an elected member, and the independent members have brought a great deal of value to the panel. Other improvements to the system, what I'm hearing is that other improvements to the system anticipated by the planning reform will probably have a better impact, a better outcome for developers and the community than simply going to a regional DAP system. And that's, I guess, a summary of the message that I'm hearing. So I could ensure that sentiment is reflected in Council's response on the planning reform.
Can you also record that the evidence suggests that the current system works well? And if there's evidence to the contrary, then what is it?
Yeah. Okay, that concludes the discussion of the whole planning reform. There'll be a report to the next meeting of Council with a revised attachment so that Council can consider endorsing that for submission to the LGA and to the expert panel.
So, sorry, Chris, just before we finish, there was one there about easier enforcement. Could I just put a pitch in to say really support that? I think it's 19, provide more effective enforcement options. Because that's pretty hopeless. And there's a number that are about aligning it up with other legislation and online approach to planning about ease of access. So that's reform 24 is about lining up legislation. 25 is about looking at it online to find out what you can do with your block. 26 is about performance monitoring. So there's a number of other things in there I think are really good. I'd love to performance monitor the department about how long they take to look at our amendments, like our heritage one. Hello. Would be great to have a report card on that. Brilliant. So I think a number of those other things have got a lot of merit in them. So,
it's interesting when you have that discussion with the department, the expert panel. It seems to be something that they don't mention. It doesn't seem to come out during that discussion.
No.
Substantial delays when we do deal with the department or the minister.
Were you suggesting, David, there were some circumstances whereby you could see a regional DAP being involved? I don't. I mean, I see it's something I think Prospect controls quite well.
If the regional boards thing got up and we found that useful, I think the things that we refer to DAC now could be done by those regional boards, because I would expect they'd be the experts in our region. Now, the things we refer to DAC are stuff on property we own. For instance, that's an easy one. So we can't do the assessment ourselves because we've got a conflict. Instead of sending it to the central DAC, which does the whole state, you'd send it to the regional DAC. Yeah, I can kind of get that. Not enough of a reason to set up a regional DAC, though. No. Not that many of those things. So no,
I just can't see a benefit, and especially as our DAP works rather well, I think.
Why couldn't you just, instead of having it there sort of all the time, just have it for the very, odd or rare occasion that you need it, and you just convene
Yeah, you could do that.
something from a panel expert.
Well, I think once it's set up, it might be an invitation to send other things there too.
And to have them on call, you're going to have to be paying them no matter what. My only concern is that we come up with a Sarah Lee solution. Layer upon layer upon layer.
Yeah. But you could have a central DAC that has to have 2 people from the regional board on it. So you could do a kind of a hybrid that's not from a panel approach, but is experts onto the DAC. So you can get I think we could solve the regional decision making, but I don't think we need to have I can't see the reason why local DAPs are a problem when they're working well. If they're not working well, what's the problem?
And why not try and solve that problem there?
So if the elected members are misbehaving, then what's wrong with enforcing it via the code?
But there's no evidence of misbehaving, is it?
Well, is it? There's not evidence that's been enforced through the code issues or through the courts.
Yeah,
and if there's a problem, then enforce it. Or improve the code or something.
A couple of monster ones going through at the moment.
Yeah, but they haven't. You could still get that with independent experts.
Yeah.
They're embedded in the industry. I mean, every architect works for a client, right? Well, actually, architects work for lots and lots and lots of clients. What happens if those clients come up and they're on the panel? You've got. I mean, there are interests across the industry, so it's not like it's.
It has happened to us, and he's excused himself twice.
Yeah, David's done it a number of times.
Yeah, so it's not like it's an immediate panacea. It actually comes with its own constraints.
Okay, we need to finish up there. If anyone has any other ideas, contact Chris. We'll report to the next meeting.
All right.
And thank Chris too, because I thought that was very good.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks, Chris. You're a champion, Chris. Well done.